lot of the new material that's more kind of like electronic synth-based is actually written outside of my kind of usual songwriting approach, in which I discarded kind of the kind of traditional instrumentation of accompaniment with the banjo or the acoustic guitar or the piano, and I decided to start instead with just sound. And so I started experimenting with just sound creation and working with effects pedals and synthesizers and computers and sequencers and drum machines, and just processing things and then collecting kind of this like catalog of beats and sounds and things. And a lot of it was kind of to kind of shake out of my previous habits and try something new. And so a lot of the new stuff, especially on the Age of Odds, is starts out with kind of ruminations of sound exploration, and then months after that I would impose a song over top of it. So I know this is starting to sound like a kind of a songwriter's process workshop conference or something, but I don't know. I just thought maybe give you some context for all of that. And while I was doing that, I discovered this folk artist named Royal Robertson, and Royal is was a black Southern folk artist, sign painter from Baldwin, Louisiana, and he's people from Baldwin here. That's amazing. And he's kind of underground. He's not sort of as popular as Henry Darger or Ramirez. There's a whole kind of a renaissance of like outsider art, folk art, self-taught art. There's a whole genre, and Royal is kind of in that school because he kind of lived and worked in this very small house that he built with his own hands. And even though his trade was sign painting, he actually was spent much more time working at his own art. And he was a self-proclaimed prophet and a minister and a soothsayer, and he had sort of mystical, magical gifts. He called himself the mystical, patriarchal prophet Royal Robertson, Libra artist. That was his astrological sign. And he was obsessed with astrology and mythology, and with comic books and with sci-fi movies. And he was, born and raised in the South, in the Assembly of God church. So he kind of created this conglomerate visionary art that was everything kind of compiled into one scenic adventure. And his art usually was painted on poster board about this big, and he used house paint, sign paints from his work, and glitter. He used a lot of glitter, and he used magic marker. He would paint one layer, and then he would leave it outside and let it get sun damage, and then you bring it into other layers. So his process was very kind of, it was a very kind of long, tedious, and he would gather all kinds of collages and newspaper clippings, and he would gather ideas from all of his sources, whether it be the book occult or the Bible or comic books. And Royal had a pretty big family. He had 12 kids, and his wife Adele, this beautiful woman who raised his kids with him, and they lived in this small house that he built on his own, and they were very, very, very poor. But later in life, Royal's kind of obsession with outer space and with the other world, the transcendental world, consumed him, and he lost sense of reality, and his ordinary life began to fade away, and he began to exist wholly in his imagination, and this caused problems with his family. He started to believe that his children were bastard children, and he started to believe that his wife, Adele, was cheating on him, and he started calling her a prostitute and a whore, and he would have these rages where he was seeing things and people and ghosts, and believed the FBI was out to get him. And for her own safety and for the safety of the children, Adele left. And for the last few decades of his life, Royal spent alone in his house with his work. And he lived kind of pretty much consumed entirely in his imagination. And he died in 1997, but he left behind kind of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these bizarre astrological cosmic fantasy adventure paintings. He designed houseboats, spaceships, automobiles. He designed like these sort of architectural wonders of like celestial cities, and he patented them all. And he sold the art for $39.95, but he would sell his patents for like $5,675 or something ridiculous like that. And he really truly believed that he had this sort of mystical, magical gift. And I guess doctors have sort of diagnosed with Royal and his behavior, with Royal as having schizophrenia and hypochondria and delusions of grandeur and all sorts of things. And I think that in the midst of my sort of own musical process, I found within the sonic landscape of just sound creation, outside of songs, outside of narrative, outside of concept, I entered into a kind of madness that was very safe and very functional kind of madness as opposed to Royal. But in Royal's work, I found a close affinity and a companionship. And so I started to use some of his work and his writings and his objects and sort of render it all into my songs. So a lot of the new record is sort of referencing Royal, referencing some of the sort of psychological disasters, that Royal experienced, that I felt that I was experiencing in my life, whether it was confusing heartache with the end of the world, or considering the afterlife, or feeling a kind of physical illness, and experiencing for the first time this kind of sensations and touch and feeling. And Royal's work is very sensual and very graphic in terms of its color and its subject. And it's also can be really, really brutal, especially toward his wife Adele. Because when she left, I think that he suffered so much guilt and he channeled that into vengeance, and almost all of his work makes a reference to Adele as being sort of a harlot or a prostitute. And there's a kind of weird kind of misogyny that's sort of in the undercurrent of a lot of his work. But the people who met him, who knew him, mostly just art collectors and artists who were fans of his work, and who spent a lot of time with him, said that after Adele left, Royal was the sweetest, most kindest gentleman they'd ever met, and they could not reconcile the kind of vengeance in his work toward his ex-wife and his demeanor in person. He was always a real gentleman, especially to women. So I think there was obviously a distortion in his mind, and I think that sort of in spite of his imagination and his visions and his spiritual gifts, it was ultimately love that really consumed him and conquered him, and he never really got over it. So anyway, that's just sort of a rambling, sort of amateur kind of art theorist's explanation of some of the stuff that I've been working through on this new material. And